Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and a fellow with the University of Connecticut's Institute for Collaboration on Health, Intervention, and Policy. She previously served as a school psychologist in South Carolina and Pennsylvania, as well as an educational consultant for Patton. During Dr. Parker's primary research focuses on school-based mindfulness interventions, emotional well-being outcomes. She is excited to continue to support systems-level change efforts in South Carolina and beyond. Welcome, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. It feels so good to be with my Pennsylvania people today. It's so lovely to see all of your faces. And I hear that we have really good representation across the beautiful state. So I'm just so thrilled to be with you this morning. So I kind of just want to get a feel for who's in the room. If you don't mind just popping in the chat what you consider to be your role. Are you an administrator? Are you a mental health support person? Are you a teacher, social worker? Are you a parent? What is your primary role? What brings you to this space today? Thank you, Mandy, administrator. Oh, I love my school social workers. And my fellow school psychologist. Hi, Jessica. I love these opportunities to collaborate with folks from across different roles because I think that there's just so much power in sharing our unique perspectives. Oh, I see a TAC. I'm a former TAC as well. Good to see you. What an amazing group. All right. Thank you so much. Let them keep rolling in. If you're just joining us, I just asked you to share your role in the chat so that I can get a feel for who's with us today. I'm going to ask you to share one more thing before we get started. So in the spirit of celebrating the promise in our students and in our programs and in ourselves, I want you to share a recent win that has unfolded in your program or your place of work. What is something that we can celebrate with you this morning? What's going right? I'll be honest, I've very much come from a solutions-focused counseling orientation. So that's why you're going to hear me focus a lot in this session on strengths and assets and protective factors and really using those things to plan and program for our students. So let's see, I see starting a new program for AEDY students, beautiful, improved MTSS processes. I love that. A new role to help with students. Successful reintegration. Oh, second day on the job. I love that. Well, I think it's a win that you're spending your second day on the job, deepening your learning. That's beautiful. PBIS, my favorite word in education. Working with challenging students to believe in us and self-advocate. So, so important. Gosh, lifelong skill there. And then validating their struggles, absolutely. Seeing the whole picture. Wow, y'all, look at what amazing things are unfolding in Pennsylvania. Can you believe this? I have goosebumps. I'm so excited. All right, well, keep sharing your wins. I'm going to keep rolling along because I know we're recording. We have a lot of information to get to. Just some housekeeping. We will have some breakout rooms in a couple minutes for you to really get to collaborate with your peers and apply our learning. So we'll have 2 of those. They'll be 10 minutes long. And I look forward to hearing all the amazing things that you talk about. The chat will be open for you to pop in questions, comments, connections. There's no such thing as too much sharing. I love to hear it all. So, and feedback too. So if I'm talking too fast, which I tend to do, please let me know that, right? I want this to be as amazing as it can be for you. And so if I have to adjust, I'll adjust. So chat, breakout rooms, questions, and then at the end, of course, we'll have some time for additional questions that you didn't ask throughout. I think that's all my housekeeping, so I'm going to get started. All right, folks, so we have two primary objectives today, and those are to identify those evidence-based interventions for commonly occurring needs within AEDY placements. And I also want to offer that, I know we have a lot of folks here from neighborhood K-12 schools, and AEDY placements are simply a microcosm of what's happening in the larger community and context. So this is not unique to students in AEDY programs. Really, what we're talking about are needs and strengths across all of our systems and how we can get our systems to work collaboratively to improve student outcomes. So don't think that if you're not within an AEDY program, you're in the wrong place. You are absolutely not. We want you here. We're also going to talk about some action steps for planning, implementation, sustainability of our efforts, and then generalization. So how do we, get some of these amazing things, these skill sets that our kids are growing, how do we generalize them back then into their neighborhood school? So I know that our AEDY programs face some unique considerations. Firstly, within the AEDY context, we have to recognize that most evidence-based school-based interventions are researched in traditional K-12 settings, right? So the research is grown from those settings and contextually relevant for those settings, which can make implementation challenging in an AEDY program. So for instance, many interventions that we would utilize in typical K-12 programming might be classified as a tier 2 or 3 intervention. So what that means is it's for a smaller group of students. It's at a higher intensity, a higher dose of whatever skills we're working on universally. But an AEDY programming, because of your population of students you serve, many of those advanced tier interventions are part of your core. They're part of your universal practices. So things like point sheets or formal periodic reviews or even counseling, those things would be advanced tier interventions in again, a neighborhood K-12 school, but they're part of your tier 1. It's intensified, and that's intentional. We also have temporal considerations with AEDY programming. So students are placed with you for a relatively short period of time. So the tools and interventions that you use have to show evidence of success in briefer applications. And so I will be providing some temporal information about the interventions I share today. And most of them, if not all of them, are, available for brief intervention. And then you have contextual considerations. So AEDY programs have different resources, both in terms of physical resources, infrastructure, personnel. Your class sizes may be different. Your wraparound services and involvement of other community agencies might be more than is typical in a K-12 neighborhood school. And then also we know that collaboration and communication with the sending LEA is incredibly a very powerful variable and an incredibly important variable in consideration when we're talking universal and intervention planning. So I just wanted to prime us on implementation science because this is such an important process to consider as you think about bringing on interventions and universal practices. So implementation science is the study of how to integrate evidence-based practices into school settings and also public health settings. It's really focusing on how to improve student outcomes by bridging the gap between research and practice. So I'm going to ask you just to reflect on this question, but how many of you, when you exited your teacher training program, or maybe you had a master's degree program where you specialized, and you learned all this amazing stuff, and then you got out into the workforce and you were ready to take on all the challenges, and you were like, wait a minute, my professors lied to me. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not, what I learned. So we know that there's a gap between research and best practice and reality, right? There's a lag time typically. And so we have to make sure that when we're considering bringing on practices and interventions, that we are planning for them so that we can be as successful as possible. And so implementation science consists of 4 distinct phases. The first phase, and many of us in the room today may be here in exploration. Exploration is where you and your team, this is not a one-person job, but a team of individuals is identifying needs and different options and deciding whether to move forward with the practice. So you may have data that suggests, we have a tier 1 problem with violent and aggressive behavior, right? So it's occurring in more than just 20% of our students. It's a tier 1 problem. And so that's our need. And so in exploration, we would be exploring different, programs, innovations, practices to ameliorate that need. That's where many of us may be today, and that's beautiful. If we skip exploration, then we may not be looking at the right data. We may not have a full understanding of the data, and we may not do our due diligence in really examining the available innovations and interventions. And we know what happens when we go that route, right? We adopt something, it doesn't turn around the results we expected for lots of different reasons, and then we abandon it. And that's where we see fatigue, right, in our colleagues, because we can only do so many new programs, new things without feeling a little bit frustrated. So we want to avoid that. The next stage is installation, and that's when we're creating the infrastructure. So we've determined our need, we've determined our innovation, and now we're planning to implement. So we provide organizational support and all the tech, the tech support, the systems in order to get that implementation off the ground. And then the next stage is initial implementation. And that's when we have our plan and we begin putting it into practice. So our team members begin using those agreed on strategies and actions. And initial implementation can take a few years. I'm sure I have many members of the PA-PBS network in the room, I hope. And so we know that it can take, 4 or 5. When I was at Donegal Intermediate School, I think we took 6 years to reach tier 1 fidelity. And that's okay, and that's expected. But initial implementation, it does take time, and that's an important thing to know. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means you're refining. And then finally, full implementation is when you're at the final stage. We know there's really no destination, right? We're always making continuous improvements and refinements. I linked this hexagon tool here for those of you who are currently exploring your program or building's needs and considering different interventions, some of which I'll share today. And so this tool is really for my planners in the room. I really believe that exploration is the most crucial stage of the implementation process. And this tool is helpful to support your selection and evaluation of potential programs and practices. So it'll help you determine your capacity to implement. So variables like staff qualifications, sustainability of staffing, coaching needs, training needs. And that's why you have your wonderful patent partners, right? And your PA-PBS network, the data systems, and also financial capacity, right? We have to be fiscally responsible. We have to also evaluate, how does this intervention or practice fit with our current initiatives? Does it align with our other school priorities, with state priorities? Does it fit with the family and the community values and culture? And does it have any impact on other interventions? The hexagon tool can also help you identify the needs. So we talked about that on the previous slide, and the target population and any supports you'll need. It helps you to consider the usability. So how well-defined is the program? Are there model implementation sites that we can learn from? Are there replications? And are there any contextual adaptations we have to keep in mind? So, was this intervention developed for use in middle school programming, and we, really need something for high school? So are there ways we can contextually adapt that to fit our context? Is there guidance on that, right? Some tools, some interventions, we know fidelity is really important. And if we change something from how it was tested in the research phase, then we can't always expect the same outcomes. Some interventions will have suggestions for adaptation. Check and Connect has suggestions. There are some others. And so that's something we have to explore. And then finally, it helps you examine the strength of the evidence. So anytime we are seeking to bring a new practice or intervention into our mix, our menu of interventions, we want to make sure that there's good evidence for that so that it's been tested in the research. We can look at the number and the quality of studies, the efficacy. So how well did it work? What were the outcomes? What were the fidelity data? And then also how cost effective it is. For my friends in the room today, I just want to be clear with you that the interventions that I researched for this presentation, I think I told Jess 95% or so are no cost, because I recognize the constraints we're under, especially with some of our funding that we've enjoyed for the last few years tapering off. So I think that's important. There are a lot of programs, additional programs that I'm not going to go over today, that are evidence-based that come at a cost. All right, and then one last consideration before we dive into our interventions. So some best practices. I started the presentation by saying this is a team effort. One person is not going to be able to serve all the roles necessary to have successful implementation of good universal or targeted practices and interventions. So we need to have a team structure. And you want to consider, who should be on that team. We want a diversity of roles, such as we want, perspectives of families and student voice. We want regular ed, special ed, admin, our service providers. Everyone has their own unique perspective and brings something to the table that can improve our efforts. We also want to set expectations for what it looks like to be a part of the team, have clear agendas, of course. We want to base all of our decision making on data, so clear, actionable data. And in some cases, you may find, hey, we need to collect a little more data. We don't actually have a full understanding of the problem, so we need to know more. And that's okay too. But data analysis should drive every MTSS meeting. And we also want to make sure that we plan for sustainability. That seems kind of oxymoronic, but I've been a member of teams where if one team member leaves, the whole team is left like, oh gosh, what now? Right? We don't want that. We want to plan for sustainability. So we want to think about that from the outset and not be reactive when the time comes. And we also want to provide the infrastructure for system evaluation and continuous improvement. So oftentimes in intervention work, we're focusing on a student's response to the intervention that we put in place. But we also want to look at the intervention from a group perspective, a more satellite perspective. What's the health of the intervention? And we can look at how many students are responding and then make tweaks to the intervention as necessary. That's super important. And we also want to make sure that we're aligning our efforts. So we're aligning our efforts under school climate and behavior and mental health and academic achievement, because we're really talking about whole people. And we know that behavior can impact our academic achievement. Academic achievement can certainly impact behavior. Mental health can impact, they're all interrelated. So we have to make sure we're aligning those efforts, and that helps us be more efficient. So I'm going to pause and check the chat, or I'll have my patent team check the chat for me, if that's okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
You're good.
I'm good. Okay, cool. I promise I'm going to take a break from talking at you in a couple slides. So I just talked about the importance of alignment. And so I think a really important point that I want to share is that what we do in the advanced tiers, when I say advanced tiers, I mean tier 2 and 3 for only some or few kids. We need to connect that work to what we're doing universally, right? So if I'm teaching kiddos coping strategies for anxiety at, a tier 2 or 3 level, the language that I use, the strategies that I teach need to be generalizable and reinforced in our universal practices. So it shouldn't be completely foreign language. I need to maybe in some cases work with my gen ed teachers and equip them with some of the language so they can prompt the student and they can reinforce when they see the student, taking five or, taking belly breaths, right? We have to plan for that across the tiers. And the other thing is, if our students are receiving advanced tier interventions, they still have access to all those wonderful universal practices, right? It's not a replacement, it's an addition. And so I have the beautiful MTSS triangle here for you, the visual. When there's an identified need that is prevalent within 20% or more of your student population, then your efforts should really include universal tier 1 supports. So you may have to intensify your supports. If I see vaping, for instance, is occurring across 36% of our student body, well, that's a tier 1 issue. That doesn't mean we don't provide some, targeted intervention for smaller groups, but it does mean I have to address it for all because it's occurring in such a large percentage of students. And so our assessment data help to assess the behaviors and the needs too, but the behaviors also that are critical to student success. So we should be looking at this both from a needs perspective and a strengths perspective. And those data are used to inform intervention development. And the data that we collect need to be sensitive to the impacts of intervention. They are used for intervention evaluation and progress monitoring. So again, that's where if you begin this journey and you are looking at the extent data and you're like, we're missing something, you may have to go back and find out what you're missing before you can move forward. And so I wanted to share for you, and I think, my neighborhood schools are going to recognize some lingo on this slide, but we have a lot of adaptable evidence-based tier 2 and 3 interventions at our disposal. And again, my AEDY program, some of these may be more tier 1 specific in your contexts. But check in, check out is a brief, very effective intervention for students whose behaviors are motivated by attention or even escape. There's an adaptation called breaks or better. And so that's a very useful, again, very adaptable intervention. Check and connect, and we have a team of patent trained check and connect trainers, is a student engagement intervention. There are time constraints on this one. So Check and Connect mentors, it's a structured mentoring intervention, sign up for a 2-year obligation. And so I can hear some of my AEDY programs saying, okay, well, that's maybe not going to be a good fit for us, and that's okay. But it is important that our AEDY folks know what's available then in our neighborhood schools, because our goal is to reintegrate right. And so neighborhood schools recognize that this is an evidence-based intervention that's at your disposal, and you can receive support from Patent to help you with implementation. Social academic instructional groups, so smaller groups focused on things like executive functioning skills or homework or social skills, those sorts of things. Wonderful short-term, brief interventions, good efficacy. Counseling, of course. And then at tier 3, again, from an ascending school perspective, we have Renew, which comes to us from University of New Hampshire, and that's a person-centered planning approach. And y'all, even if you're not going to be able to bring Renew into your AEDY program, I do want to share that some of the person-centered activities are really, really powerful, and you can certainly pull from person-centered planning approaches to support your work with AEDY. Person-centered planning is a way for students to be able to share their vision, their purposes, their goals. It helps you have an understanding of the student's past, present, and their future. And it also helps the youth understand what actions they may need to engage for change. There's a collaboration and a mutual support and respect. And you're really just helping that student. You're wrapping a team around them to help them reach their goals. So it's powerful. And I definitely think adaptable to your environment. And then, of course, we work with our agency partners to provide wraparound services. And then another really important ingredient when you're planning for, these universal and targeted practices is to consider the risk and protective factors in your population. And I'm not just talking from a within person perspective. In fact, most of the time when you hear me talk about students, I'm not talking about within person factors. I'm really thinking about environment and the role that environment plays in placing us at risk or promise, and also in protecting us. So we know there are some risk factors, and many of them go beyond the scope of what we can really intervene on in schools. And that's why I like to focus on protective factors. But some risk factors associated with an increased likelihood of problem behaviors and delinquency include poverty, having, parents with modeling substance use and abuse, students themselves using illicit substances, disengagement from school, isolation due to bullying or otherwise, involvement in gangs, and friendships with peers. This is a big one, who engage in risky behaviors. So I'm sure, as I'm thinking about the students I've worked with, I'm sure you're thinking about the students you've worked with. You're like, check, 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 right? And it's important to acknowledge this is a reality for our kids, right? And that is important to acknowledge, right? But we're not going to admire that problem because we are solution focused and we are going to embrace the protective factors to increase the positive outcomes for our students. And so on the other side of that are the protective factors, and these reduce the likelihood of negative outcomes and behaviors. And some of these protective factors include caring relationships. In fact, there has been a lot of work looking at the impact of positive, supportive adults. And there's this like dose response relationship where the more positive, caring adults we have in our lives, in the lives of at promise youth, the better their outcomes. So my mind is always like, who can I connect this kid to in the building, right? I can tell you my kid's favorite staff person at their elementary school is the building maintenance custodian. He's come to their sporting events, right? And so I think we need to think about who are the people in our buildings that want to interface with students more, and how do we set up those opportunities for positive connection? In addition to caring relationships, having high expectations, communicating to kids, hey, we believe in you. We see your potential. We see your strengths. Having opportunities for participation and contribution. So again, helping our students enjoy having some agency and voice and autonomy. And that's something that we see when kids have chronic behavioral difficulties. Their opportunities for choice and autonomy and expressing their agency really are diminished. And so how do we get that back for them? Engaging our youth in safe and healthy social activities such as sports and recreation, positive friendships, presence of mentors, helping support the development of skills and interests, opportunities for engagement in the school. So a student advisory club, for example, there's a lot of work in secondary PBIS that looks at these student advisories where we are really wanting representation of students from all across the social continuum. We want the students who struggle with attendance. We want the students who receive special ed for, learning. We want everyone who's a member of the school community represented on that student advisory. And so do we have that? Or if we don't, how can we do that? Positive norms and clear expectations for behavior. So there's your PBIS. And all of those things create a sense of physical and psychological safety. And that's really what it comes down to. My behavior is influenced by my environment. Certainly it's influenced by within person factors too, but it's very much influenced by my environment. And so if I feel safe, if I feel like I belong, if I feel included, if I feel supported, my behavior will respond. I believe that. So I want you to share in the chat. This is a brag moment. I want you to share what are some of the protective factors in place at your schools, your AEDY programs, your IUs. What are some protective factors that come to mind as I read through that list? Don't be shy. I know it's uncomfortable sometimes to brag, but this is your moment. Here we go. Counseling and mentoring are available 24/7 for AEDY students. Beautiful. De-escalation room, positive staff connections, behavior matrix, positive rapport. Good, good, good. Relationships are so crucial. I know you know that. Y'all are the masters of relationships. Fostering relationships, school climate. So I'm seeing a lot of themes: relationships, school climate, access, counseling, right? Safety. Connections within ADY and their home schools. So, so important. Parents, thank you to our friend who shared about parents. So important. Mentoring. Oh, so many amazing things. I love it. So, I mean, just bask in knowing what, you know, numerous protective factors you have in your sites and all of the things that are going right. And how do we use those to continue to build success in our students? This is so beautiful. All right, keep them coming. I'm going to keep rolling for the sake of time, but I will come back to the chat and check. All right, we are going to move into some targeted interventions, y'all. So when I was planning the session, I was looking over some data and working with your patent partners, and we identified that there are two real, technically tier 1 concerns happening that are resulting in students being referred to AEDY. And the first is vaping. And I do have a poll. So in the chat, I want you to share, it doesn't have to be an exact figure, but what percentage of your student population was referred due to vaping or is currently vaping? If you're not an AEDY program. Just pulling my chat back up. So what percentage of your student population were referred to AEDY for vaping or are currently vaping? Half? 60%? So almost 2/3, 3/5. Referred 20, using 100. 100. Yeah. Okay, so what we're seeing at the regional level in Pennsylvania is reflective of what we're seeing nationally. Referred 30, using 100. Yep. And so I just want to validate that, again, I think AEDY we think of as, for some kids, but this is a universal problem, right? This is happening with more than just some kids. And so we have to adjust our efforts to respond to that. So I just pulled from the PD website, the statewide figures. 25.67% of those referred to AEDY are for display or use of a controlled substance, which I assume our vaping falls here. And so it sounds like it's definitely more prevalent than, our referrals would even catch. So this brings us to our first case study. And my patent colleagues will drop our case study into the chat. You're going to have the opportunity to go into a breakout room with your colleagues. Actually, I think I have guidance on my slide. I do. Read case study 1 in your breakout rooms. And then as a group, I want you to think about, as you read over that case study, I want you to identify and discuss the risk factors and how you might address decreasing the ones that are within your wheel of influence. What are the protective factors and how can you embrace and increase those protective factors? And then any intervention ideas that you have for the case study. And you will have 10 minutes in your breakout rooms. And when we come back, while you're in your breakout room, I want you to designate someone to share out, and it'll just be in the chat. So no pressure. But I want you to identify someone that can share your takeaways in the chat. So you'll need someone to take notes. And we'll talk through your ideas when we come back in 10 minutes. Sound good? Awesome. Welcome back. All right, y'all. I'm excited to hear what your ideas were. If you want to share your ideas for intervention or what protective factors you'd really like to embrace to plan for interventions, drop them in the chat, and then we'll keep rolling. Help me too to see kind of what are some ideas and things that we're already putting into play across the Commonwealth. Wraparound services, good. So many of our communities have such amazing resources, and it's just facilitating that relationship with our school entities. Anything else? Oh, here we go. Cessation group, mentor, love, small group instruction, after school program, appropriate role models. Awesome. Yeah. So you can see that even for like one student, one identified need, we see a myriad of ways to approach that need. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. So you're identifying universal practices, you're identifying targeted practices, wrap around. This is beautiful. Stress management. Yes. Awesome, y'all. Great. Well, you can keep jotting your ideas in the chat. I'm going to keep rolling. Time management is not one of my strengths, but it is something that I'm continuing to work on. But I want to keep us on track. So just to share some stats, and I'm assuming these will be validating to you. We know that, and these data might be outdated at this point, but approximately 5% of students currently are using vapes. 70% of middle and high school students are exposed to the marketing, which happens to be a very powerful influence. Half of students who are vaping want to quit, and I think that's important, especially from our intervention efforts. And when we're talking marketing, it's not just marketing of the past, but students are seeing this in social media, advertisements, retail settings, all of it. So they're sort of inundated. It's almost like social media and with vaping is like 24-hour news networks, right? With news, it's just everywhere all the time. And an important stat that I want us to think about is if someone hasn't started using tobacco by age 26, they're likely to never start. So we very much recognize that lifelong use of tobacco and vapes really needs to be intervened upon in these formative youth years. Because if we successfully prevent, then we are just in the long term, we're preventing so many people from ever becoming smokers or using vapes. So some of the reasons that youth give for vaping include social influences. So most youth that vape offer that their friend offered it to them, right? A friend is the most common reason. There was a 2021 study that found that 1 in 3 youth obtained e-cigarettes from a friend. And the most common reason that middle school and high school students give for trying a vape is that a friend used them, right? So it's sort of like our friends normalize it. And so why not? And so peer pressure can lead teens to vape to fit in or to avoid ridicule even. Certainly there's targeted advertising, flavored products. So this is a huge one as well. So vapes come in a variety of flavors that happen to appeal to young people, like fruit and candy, mint. So most youth who use e-cigarettes, they start with a flavored variety. I'm sure that you're aware of this, but again, from a prevention standpoint, it's important to think about why our students are drawn to these things. And something that I learned was that some e-cigarettes actually cost less than regular cigarettes. So they're easy to come by, they're cheaper, they're flavored in these fun flavors. Some youth say they use vapes to cope with stress or anxiety or depression. And again, I want us to think about this from an intervention standpoint. So if we understand the root cause of why a youth is using a vape, then we can better, match a targeted intervention, right? Um, easy to conceal. There's also a lot of misinformation. So youth don't really think there are health risks. And that's because for a long time, we didn't have a lot of research, right? They were new. But now we do have research. And so it's important from our prevention standpoint to make sure that youth are aware of those health risks. And then certainly if youth use them often enough, repeated use can lead to addiction. And, from a brain perspective, this is important because the adolescent brain is still developing. And so it's uniquely susceptible to nicotine. And the other thing to note is that nicotine content has actually increased over time. And so, the impacts are even more detrimental. And so we really have to understand where our students fall in this continuum. Did they try vaping because it was cool, their friend offered it to them? Are they trying to cope with some kind of mental stressor? Are they at the point of addiction? Where do they fall? And that will certainly inform kind of our approach to treatment. And so this MTSS triangle is unique to vaping. And so you're going to see that there are some tier 1 preventative strategies. So certainly having a tobacco vape-free policy. I am confident that 100% of us in the room, our sites have that. So kudos. Embedding this into classroom instruction, having school-wide campaigns, and I would say too, having student-led school-wide campaigns, and parent and student awareness presentations. So those are all things we can do, again, universally for all. At the tier 2, and I missed someone here too. I think, we have some group level interventions as well, but certainly peer advocacy programs. So intensifying our efforts, our campaign around not using vapes. And then at the targeted or the very intensive intervention level, we have individualized treatment. And so I want to go back to that tier 2 peer advocacy program because these are showing great promise. These programs train and support students in middle and high school to spread drug and tobacco-free messages on their school campuses. And so again, it's a student-led endeavor, which just has so many benefits. Just leadership capacity and positive peer role modeling and student engagement, just so many. And so the goals of these advocacy programs are to educate their peers around the harms of tobacco, vaping, and cannabis use. It helps them develop skills in public speaking, advocacy, problem solving. It improves the health and well-being of their peers. It engages the community in these advocacy and awareness projects. It helps them gain critical skills in research, which is amazing. And then, develop some media campaign skills. And then also it allows us to work with youth that may have non-traditional leadership skills and youth with lived experience, and giving them opportunities they may not have otherwise. And so I am offering some tier 1 enhancements. So, having vape-free climate culture and education, again, like I think that's probably pretty universal in this group of amazing educators. But I think it's important for us to remember that according to the CDC, the most effective approaches to helping students quit vaping and tobacco use are counseling and education, right? And so this climate and culture of, being vape free, we could have signs throughout the school campus. It's recommended to have them at entranceways in the restrooms, of course, spaces where students are sneaking off to do this. Stairwells, hallways, playgrounds, and including the students in this public awareness campaign can pay dividends. As far as well-being, we want to make sure that we're offering replacement behaviors. So my behavior people in the room, I know I can hear the amen, because we can't simply say, let's reduce a behavior without giving coping skills or a replacement behavior, right? And so again, that comes with determining what the root cause is. But we can certainly, at the tier 1 level, teach and practice and reinforce health promoting habits and coping strategies. And again, vape use is a tier 1 issue. And so teaching physical and emotional well-being is a tier 1 priority. We can include parents in this campaign as well. And the smoke-free teen that is linked there, and I should have said this at the beginning, but you will have access to these slides and these links will be live. So you'll be able to explore these resources at the end of the training. But Smoke-Free Teen has a ton of resources to help teens quit vaping, including a personalized quit plan. They have how-to tip sheets. There's something called a vaping reality check. There's guidance for the first day, dealing with cravings, triggers. I mean, just a ton of amazing free resources. And there's also a smoke-free text for teens, which is a text messaging service for teens 13 to 17 who are ready to quit. So those are some nice enhancements. And then there are some tier 1, again, universal for all programs. So You and Me Together comes from Stanford. It's from the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. And it's a 6-lesson evidence-based curriculum created by the Stanford Reach Lab. They have lessons for elementary, middle, and high schools. And I am a, streamlined, continuous kind of person. And so I would like to see things implemented across the whole spectrum. So even if you're a middle or high school building or program, I want you to think about how can we work with our elementary partners to make sure that, we're tackling this across the board. But anyway, back to You and Me Together. The curriculum includes 6 50-minute lessons, has games, activities, presentation materials, and then it also teaches students it focuses on their attitudes towards e-cigarettes. It teaches strategies to resist social media marketing and other marketing. It teaches stress reduction and coping strategies, which is super cool. I think Jess has already introduced y'all to Truth Initiative's Vaping Know the Truth. This is a national youth vaping prevention curriculum. It's free and it's a digital learning experience that's self-led. It's served over 770,000 youth and young adults. And it's geared towards grades 8 through 12. And I like this one because the lessons are quick. So it's 6 10-minute lessons. And there's been some, empirical research on the program that has found promising evidence that this is an effective school-based intervention to teach youth about the harms associated with vaping and how to quit. And then Catch My Breath is another tier 1 program, again, for all evidence-based youth vaping prevention program. It's free to US schools and it's available in English and Spanish. And it's for grades 5 through 12. So I love the accessibility here. It's a peer-led program and it includes grade level specific and health education standards aligned curriculum. And they tout that they're the only school-based vaping prevention program proven to reduce the likelihood of vaping among youth. And it is listed in the SAMHSA evidence-based resource guide series. So lots of good resources, again, free, tier 1, used with all students. At tier 2, we have some targeted interventions. So the first is in depth, and that's from the American Lung Association. And this is facilitated either one-on-one or in a group setting. And it teaches about nicotine dependence, establishing healthy alternatives, and strategies for quitting. What I really like about this program is that any adult can become a facilitator by taking a free 1-hour training and then using the provided resources. So 1-hour training and you can bring this amazing intervention to your students and it's free. So that's pretty cool. Stanford's Reach Lab offers a range of trainings and curricula as well. So I talked about them on the previous slide, but they're here too with the Smart Talk curriculum. A lot of amazing resources from tobacco and cannabis prevention to school-based intervention. And so Healthy Futures is their group curriculum for vape and tobacco violations on school grounds specifically. And these lessons are self-paced and that would be about an hour, or they also have an option for a 2 to 4 hour teacher or counselor-led curriculum. And it's 5 lessons if I didn't say that already. And then also, I talked earlier about person-centered planning. And so when we're talking about using person-centered planning for addressing vape use, then we're really thinking about involving the adolescent in the decision making and tailoring the interventions to their unique needs and goals. So you could see how you can use that approach even in tandem with some of these more structured interventions. And then I'm not calling them tier 3 interventions. I'm calling them individualized. And that's because they're not facilitated by school personnel. They are individual one-on-one intensive interventions, but they are not necessarily school sponsored or led. But I do think it's important that they're available to our students, right? And so Truth Initiative has this EX program, which it's a text messaging program, and they found that their program can increase the odds of quitting by up to 40%. And that was research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's the study surveyed 1,500 e-cigarette users, ages 13 to 17. And they found that it was effective for teens with high levels of nicotine dependence and mental health concerns. And that's the first randomized clinical trial to evaluate a quit vaping program. Pretty awesome. It includes one-on-one coaching, nicotine replacement therapy, and it's also available in English and Spanish. Love. And then 2 other programs, one, My Life, My Quit. That's a Pennsylvania free quit line program. And that is a 5 coaching session phone program specifically geared toward teens. And then Not For Me from the American Lung Association is a self-paced online service. So again, we're thinking universal all the way through individualized, and you've got lots of options at your disposal. So I just want you to take, I'm not even going to set my timer. Let's take about a minute or two, and I want you to think over what prevention strategies that you have in place at Tier 1. So what are all students exposed to? And then what interventions are in place currently at your advanced tiers? And, maybe consider what needs to be adjusted, or maybe you really liked the sound of one of those interventions I just shared with you. So what's one action step that you want to address your current need? And you can share anything you want in the chat with regard to these prompts. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat for a minute. Oh, I'm seeing amazing things in the chat. So interventions like identifying triggers, that's fundamental and part of so many of those interventions I talked about. Alternative ways to calm, build confidence, and then some commentary on the addictiveness. Yep. That's why I think we have to approach it from that full tiered perspective, right? So some of our students, it's too late for prevention, but it doesn't mean we can't provide that education that maybe they could have prevented in the first place, and then providing them with the support to combat that addiction. 30 minutes of group, tier 1, too good for drugs. Oh, I love that. Fabulous. Okay, well, keep the ideas coming. I'll keep rolling. We are going to move into our second area of targeted intervention, well, universal and targeted interventions, and that's for violent behavior. So 2 main reasons why students are referred to AEDY programs and placements, and that was vaping, and the second was violent behaviors. So I'm going to poll again, what percentage of your student population was referred for violent behavior like serious fights? Or if you're sending LEA or neighborhood school, what percentage of your student population have been involved in a serious fight? So 70 to 80%, 80 to 90, the other half of the vaping group or along with vaping. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yep. So our percentages are mapping pretty much just like our vaping percentages. Okay, so threats. Yeah. So again, I want us to reflect on the numbers that we're seeing. For the most part, we're seeing this as being a tier 1 issue. And so just share the state of the data in Pennsylvania. 34.5% of students are placed in AEDY due to violent or threatening behavior. And so that percentage may not necessarily represent, the state of violent behavior at the whole student population, but certainly it is a tier 1 issue for AEDY. So we have another case study to explore in our breakout rooms, and now we are pros at navigating the breakout rooms. So we are going to give you a little less time, and that's also because I'm so long-winded. But we're going to give you about 7 minutes with your colleagues in your breakout room. And again, I want you to think about, as you read through the case study, I want you to identify, are there risk factors that we can decrease? Are there protective factors that we can embrace? And what intervention ideas come to mind as you read through the students' needs? So we will send you into breakout rooms and see you back here at around 11:17. All right, welcome back, everyone. So if you are the designated recorder for your group and you want to just share your takeaways in the chat, maybe what protective factors you'd want to embrace or interventions that you've already used in your sites that are efficacious for reducing violent and aggressive behavior, whatever really came to mind as you talked through that case study, feel free to share. I'm just seeing your message now, Karen. Thank you for sharing that. We're glad to have you with us. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to get your thoughts in the chat, but I'm going to keep rolling. I promise I'll come back to them, but I want to get through all of our content. So just to give you an overview nationwide of violent behavior in youth, we see that in the past year, 1 in 5 students report having experienced bullying on school grounds, and 1 in 6 fewer actually online or via text. That surprised me. And 20% have been involved in a physical fight in the past 30 days. 1 in 8 students carried a weapon at least one day, and 1 in 10 missed school due to feeling unsafe. And those are very recent data from the CDC. So this, again, it's definitely, if not a tier 1 issue in all settings, it's certainly an issue that we need to work to prevent. And so that would be tier 1. So consequences are pretty obvious, but homicide, this was not, this was new learning for me. Homicide is the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24. We see 19 deaths per day and over 800 youth treated daily for physical assault related injuries. Certainly this has negative impacts to youth, families, and communities. We see impacts on mental health issues. I just shared, youth are avoiding school for feeling unsafe. We see things like depression, anxiety. Some youth are resorting to substance use, poor academic performance. We see social isolation, youth experiencing a lack of support. Certainly some youth then involved in legal issues, injuries, and then community violence. So I think that these data are staggering and they point to the solution really being at the community level, which includes schools, but it has to be a community effort. And that means partnering between our AEDY and neighborhood sending school entities, but also with looking at what resources are available in the community to support these kiddos. So at tier 1, again, tier 1 is all about prevention. And so we can install some violence prevention curricula, having school-wide campaigns, much like we, see works for anti-vaping, anti-tobacco. We see this as an efficacious strategy for combating violent behavior as well. Certainly your social emotional learning and behavioral lessons, part of your PBIS menu of supports, having clear expectations, making sure that we're looking for the good and we're reinforcing it. So positive reinforcement. And that's not just students, but it's staff, it's communities, it's families, making sure that we're hitting that magic ratio, acknowledging positive things 4 to 5 times as often as things that may need addressed. And then service learning opportunities. And then for smaller groups of students who need additional support, we can provide that in small group social skills training or anger management training. And I'll talk through some of those programs. Mentoring is really powerful for youth experiencing increased levels of aggression and violent behavior. Restorative practices, peer mediation, and then certainly for some or for few, individualized intensive intervention. And so when we're thinking, going back to universal supports, our school-wide social emotional learning curriculum can provide students with instruction around emotion regulation. And so that teaches kids how to stop that impulse before they act on it and to identify, hey, I feel this way, and here's something I can do about how I feel. It helps teach kids empathy. It helps kids more effectively communicate their needs. Nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, it's an oldie but a goodie. It works. And conflict resolution, so how to solve conflicts when they arise. And these programs have been shown to reduce aggression and improve relationships among students. Good old PBIS helps to establish those clear expectations for positive behavior throughout the school, and it rewards students, or I like the word reinforces students, for meeting those expectations. And PBIS has been shown to reduce disruptive behavior, and it also has benefits for creating a more positive school climate. Our violence prevention materials include age-appropriate lessons on anti-bullying, peer mediation, and as I mentioned, nonviolent communication and conflict resolution. It also teaches kids the consequences of violence and how to handle conflicts appropriately and peacefully. We talked school-wide campaigns. Some ideas for a school-wide campaign might be like having a respect week. I know, and I keep giving shout outs to Donegal, but when I was at Donegal, we had one year we targeted respect, which was one of our building expectations on our matrix. And so we had tons of initiatives and activities around respect. Students created media programming around respect, and it was a lot of fun. And it just helps raise awareness in this context about violence prevention. And it encourages students to be upstanders, not bystanders, when they witness aggression. And then at the tier 2, like I mentioned, our small groups focus on anger management. Again, everything we do at tier 1, we also do at tier 2. It's just in a more intensified way. So we help students with problem solving. We may support students who struggle with interpersonal relationships, mentoring, as I mentioned. So again, I'm sure that when you look at this menu of supports, you probably feel pretty good about what you're doing at your sites, because I know you're doing so many amazing things, and it's just making sure that they're in alignment and that students have access to the full range depending on their need. And so we know there are some protective factors that are preventative in nature, right? So having a long-term, investment in school and long-term goals, being connected to one's family, but also to supportive adults within the community, the school being part of that community, participating in extracurricular activities and pro-social activities, and then having close relationships with pro-social peers, which is why sometimes adults may need to facilitate that, right? And that's why peer mentoring can be really powerful. And then certainly having a positive school culture. As far as school-wide prevention, I've already talked through so many of these on that menu slide, but some that I want to pull out include having a sense of belonging and personal value. I mentioned earlier, if we have that sense of belonging, and we feel included and affirmed, then we are just basically given permission to really meet our own potential. And so that's super important. Having opportunities for building those skills and being reinforced when we observe those skills. And then again, creating those links. I think of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model here, right? Linking among families, schools, communities, individuals. One thing that emerged that was surprising to me, but in an awesome way, is that when I did this research, was that our universal prevention and intervention programs are actually most powerful for our students most at risk of engaging in aggressive behavior. So more so than students who are at lower levels of risk. And I think that is just so incredibly powerful. So our universal programs focus on elementary, middle, and high school students in a universal setting, so again, for all, with the intention of preventing and reducing violent, aggressive, disruptive behaviors. It is rated as effective in reducing these behaviors when delivered in the general education setting to all students, rather than only a few selected students. And students are taught different skills and coping mechanisms to reduce violent, aggressive, and disruptive behavior. And they're pictured here on your slide. And other universal school-based programs teach students topics and skills such as self-awareness, emotional control. They focus on self-esteem, positive social skills, and teamwork. And so many of these in addition to these classroom components, many interventions also incorporate a multi-approach where parents, peers, community members are involved in the intervention. And so an important reminder is that even if our students evidence advanced tier needs, our efforts at the advanced tier should be connected to our universal practices, and our students receiving intensified support should still have these universal supports. So I've talked through a lot of these already, but I want to focus here on mindfulness. So mindfulness, there have been studies that have shown that mindfulness practices can lead to a reduction in violent behavior. It increases problem-solving abilities, and it increases emotional regulation and self-control. And also trauma-informed services, which didn't make my slide, but trauma-informed services, mental behavioral health treatment, community support services can address violence and its consequences. And so some tier one, I'm sorry about the speed at which I'm presenting now, but I'm running out of time. Some tier one programs that have proven efficacious include the Expect Respect program. And this is implemented in middle and high schools, and it's been effective in preventing aggression, violence, threats, which came up in our chat, and intimidation. Students are taught 5 core skills. That's how to discriminate respectful from non-respectful behavior, how to use a stop phrase if someone isn't being respectful, how to remove a recipient if they're a bystander, how to use a stop strategy if asked to stop, and to get help from an adult. And then one that I found so exciting is the C Learning, which comes from Emory University, and that stands for Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning. It's a 7-module self-paced free online course. And after you, as the facilitator, and after you complete it, you gain access to the curriculum, the resources, and excitingly, the research has demonstrated positive impacts on students' empathy and perspective taking and self-efficacy regarding school. And it has led to greater levels of intrinsic motivation. And some tier 2, 3 interventions, fewer available that are free of charge, but I did want to draw attention to some really good ones. So Big Brothers Big Sisters has had really powerful, long-standing research has shown that students who receive intervention through Big Brothers Big Sisters have a lower rate of using illicit drugs, fewer times of hitting individuals, fewer skipped classes, higher competency for schoolwork, and higher parental trust. And then, of course, we have some therapeutic approaches, which I know many of your programs are already using, but good to have as a reminder. So because we're at time, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments now, and you will have access. You'll see in my slide deck that there are a couple of slides that have resources for you specific to vaping, specific to aggressive and violent behaviors, and then, of course, my references. But I appreciate your collaboration. You are all wonderful. Nothing makes me happier than spending a day with my Pennsylvania colleagues. And you work with the students who are most near and dear to my heart. And so thank you for all that you do to improve their lives.
We would like to thank Dr. Parker and this amazing audience for engaging in today's awesome presentation. In the chat, you're going to find the survey for Act 48. Recognize that tomorrow or this afternoon, potentially, you'll receive an email that includes all the links shared in this presentation, as well as additional resources aligned to this training, including pop-up practices that directly relate to the conversation today. And we anticipate the captioning of this presentation to be completed and placed on the AEDY website in the next few weeks. Thank you all again so much, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much to Dr. Parker.